Hi, and welcome to Connect with Carla B. As we know, we all live busy lives, but somehow I seem to find ways to connect with people, not just in my community, but beyond that. Today, I'm excited to be interviewing someone in my community that I admire, respect, who is, if I'll tell you who she is, but before that, if you've ever heard her speak anywhere at any time, beyond the fact that her story is incredible, she's just a dynamic person. So I'm going to introduce you to someone who I've connected with a long time ago, Miss Nadine Smith. Hi, Nadine.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello, Carla. Good to be part of the program. I'm looking forward to this.
So what I'm going to ask you to do, let's take Michelle Obama, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If Michelle Obama was to introduce Nadine Smith in Paris or something, I'm amping it up.
Okay.
The thing is, what would you want her to say? How would you want her to introduce you?
Wow, that is a great question. First of all, that I'm hanging out in Paris with Michelle Obama. Somebody recently introduced me, and they barely talked about my bio, and they only talked about this moment that we had interacted, we connected. And she said, I didn't know who this person was, but she went out of her way. And it was the most powerful intro to me. It felt like it was really about me, the person, not accolades or titles.
Right.
And so, I have had the pleasure of meeting the First Lady on a number of occasions because I was on the Obama Finance Committee. And I think the thing that I would love as part of this introduction, my gosh, I was not prepared for this, is I met her because I was on the Finance Committee. And I was probably one of the poorest people on the Finance Committee. But I had made a commitment then that if I encountered you, didn't matter if you were a taxi driver or the person that held the door for me, I was going to ask you to contribute. I always ask people for $1. And if they said yes to $1, they probably gave 10.
Right.
But I raised like $250,000 for the campaign, like small donors at a time, and I used it to prompt conversations. And I remember getting to share that with her. So I think that would be the way I'd want to be introduced, because for me, I remember reading about, civil rights legends, Rosa Parks, Dr. King, and what really made them accessible to me were the moments where I found out that they weren't these big, bombastic, really personalities in a way, that they simply were willing to do, in many ways, the small things that led up to that.
Like
being
any
in the
task.
right place in the right time. Yeah, like Dr. King, he was kind of put in charge primarily because he had no beef with anybody. He was too new to the community, so he didn't have beef with the rest of the pastors. And they're like, let the young one take over. And so I kind of feel like that message, if you always think of people being who they come to be instead of the journey of how they came to be there, then you can be intimidated by their story. But if you realize they just showed up and they took these small steps, and you can take those small steps. So I like that part of my story, the small steps.
So if I had to introduce you, I would say that I happen to know you're a wife. I will say you're a dedicated mother. I would say you're someone from the outside that appears to be able to create balance in your life. That's how it looks to me, not maybe other people. Because I remembered when I reached out to you once and you were away, like, not camping, but you were in an RV somewhere not here. And you were like, I'm like disconnecting and I'm spending time with my family. And that was important. You still took time to take my call, and that probably has to do with that connection that I'm talking about. And someone who is focused on a cause. And to the point of creating an entire organization to champion that cause. So tell us a little bit about Equality Florida. How did that come to be? And sitting here now, the fact that that was already in place when just a few days ago we're all talking about the Pulse incident. And so you were already in place for that.
Yeah, well, Equality Florida was really born in the Tampa Bay area. As we are dealing with this attack by Governor DeSantis and the rubber stamp Republican leadership in our state, Florida isn't the only place these attacks are happening, but it's the place where all of them are happening. The attack on the LGBT community, the racist purging of curriculum, the attack on academic freedom, the attack on access to abortion. All of these things flow from the same ideology. And so we are experiencing all of it in Florida because we have Trump and DeSantis running against each other. But because I talk about this, I end up reminding people that we've seen all of this before. And we saw it in Florida with Anita Bryant and her Children's Crusade, which was really just another attack on the LGBTQ community. And people forget or don't know that she was bankrolled by a group that at the time their primary issue was opposing school integration. And that was the moral majority. Long before abortion became their obsession, they did not agree with Supreme Court decisions about school integration. And they bankrolled that march from Florida all the way across the country into this decade to undo those horrible laws that she instigated. But so our origin is in the aftermath of Anita Bryant, where the Miami-Dade Human Rights Ordinance was repealed. We sort of led the charge in Florida to pass local human rights ordinances. And from our victories in Tampa and in Hillsborough County, a lot of other cities began to pursue. We became a statewide resource, and we eventually evolved into the Human Rights Task Force of Florida, and then became Equality Florida in 1997. So we've been around building, and it was sort of at that moment that we said, while the local work is really super important, people are in Tallahassee who are making decisions about our lives who have no sense of accountability to our community. Tallahassee is so far away from the population centers that most people have never traveled there, they've never lobbied, and there was a way that our lawmakers were getting to Tallahassee and feeling so far from their constituency that they would just kind of wild out and do whatever they please. And so we said, we will never allow them to go to Tallahassee, make decisions about our lives without knowing that we are there watching and holding them accountable. So that was the birth of Equality Florida in 1997. And since then, we've kept that promise. We've been in Tallahassee for 25 years. We've blocked every piece of terrible legislation. But because we're in a state where DeSantis and Trump are running against each other and the governor has lurched hard to the right in order to usurp Trump's base, it means that moderate Republicans are gone in Tallahassee. And that has paved the way for this cascade of horrific bills, that are whitewashing history in our schools and attacking parents of trans kids and the trans population and the LGBTQ population and sort of destroying our state's reputation.
So it's June. When we were riding up in the elevator, I did my signature Happy Pride, one leg, rainbow move that I love to do. What should people know about Pride and the importance of Pride, not just in our community here, for people who may not even be out? Like, what should they know about Pride?
Well, there's a couple of things I think people should know about Pride. Its origin came very specifically from persecution, from raids by police where they would incarcerate people for not wearing the clothing that was ascribed to their gender, for being in a gay bar, and they routinely rousted gay bars, beat people up. And in 1969, the reason that Stonewall and Pride are seen as sort of an emblematic beginning of the modern LGBTQ movement is because people fought back. And what began as a police raid turned into a multi-day riot, and it was an act of defiance to this oppressive authority. It was an act of liberation. And so pride has meant we will continue to demand our respect. We will continue to demand to be treated as equals under just laws. And we will build community around that. And so, for decades now, pride has grown and expanded. And for some people, it has drifted too far away from the origin as a moment of political protest, of, progress is never just a direct line. Every movement experiences backlash. And so in this moment, I think the call has been to show up with pride in the spirit of Stonewall, to show up with pride with a willingness to fight for the protections that they're trying to undo. And we're seeing that in Florida. We're seeing not only more prides coming online, but we're seeing more people showing up for pride.
Right.
And more allies showing up for pride.
And that's what I was going to talk about next,
Yeah.
the whole allyship. And last year, my big campaign to be Grand Marshal of Pride, and being probably one of the most excited people to be able to be on a float saying this is something that I fully support. And my campaign was more around pride for all, like meaning we all have to get together and say, wait a minute, like it's not okay to mistreat people for this reason. So it's why it was so important for me. I'm like, all I kept saying is that, like, everybody was like, but you're not gay. Yes, but pride for all. Like, meaning if we all lock arms and say we're not going to tolerate it, it's more likely to not happen. But if it's us against them, I'm fighting for this. No, this is important because I don't want, I've heard several coming out stories that have I'm emotional thinking about it right now, to think that someone, whether in their own home, in the school, in the community, has to pretend because out of fear. That's hurt for years.
Yeah.
For years. So that, like, it as a mother, as somebody that cares, it hurts to think that, because I don't have to do that. So why should anybody have to do that?
Absolutely. No, I think it's so important. And for allyship, there's a quote that's been making its way around that if you're not getting hit by the same rocks being thrown at a marginalized group, then you're not standing close enough as an ally, right?
Oh, wow.
And I think about it this way. There's a story of anti-Semitism in the community, and as a result, everybody puts a menorah in their window to say, okay, you won't be able to distinguish us.
Right.
And it wasn't because they were Jewish, it was because they were in solidarity. It was because they stood on this value. And so to, allies showing up at Pride in strong numbers, it is a message to say, these are our values, these are our principles, you should have the right to exist. But I'd add another piece to it, because there is a thing that happens, and we see it in Putin's Russia, where they have the same bills that DeSantis is passing here, these purges of honest history, these attacks on the trans community, even the attack on the drag artists. They're all from this same playbook. And it's easy to track how quickly those attacks on a particular segment spread. When they went after the LGBTQ community and began removing any book that had any reference to our existence, even a book about two male penguins in a New York zoo raising a penguin chick, that's the true story, they removed it under the label of pornography, right? Wow. This children's book. And they did that with all of these books. But how quickly did they start pulling The Life and Times of Rosa Parks off the shelves? And how quickly did they begin rejecting textbooks, saying they were riddled with critical race theory? And what we know is when the attacks begin on trans women and on drag artists, they quickly become attacks on women, period. There was a 9-year-old girl who at a track meet, who some enraged parent in the crowd, upset that she had won the race, began shrieking that she was really a boy and screaming at her and humiliating her. And,
Wow.
but the ease with which people expand these attacks into a kind of gender policing for all women is it's like we who call ourselves allies in any given situation, we actually have a vested interest in standing up in these moments. And for people who thought, well, I don't know any trans young people, none of my friends have trans kids, you might have sat it out, but all they were doing is sharpening the sword that they're now using in ways that are hurting you directly. So I love the image that you just had of Pride being a moment of linking arms and solidarity, because that's what we need right now, and that's actually what we're seeing.
It has to be like the oneness of our community. So I was just talking to somebody today about the analogy of the quilt. And believe it or not, among other things, I'm a quilter. So I could use this analogy. So it's this idea of like, what do I want my community to look like? And there's a particular, the first type of quilt I learned how to make was called, I think it was called stack and slash or stack and what. But it was, you take maybe 9 pieces of fabric or something, you put it all on top of each other, you cut it, and then you take a piece from each one to make this 9 block. But each block looks different, and then you put it all together, but really it was just 9 pieces of fabric, but all those colors get it. So do we want just one? Or do we want to have this meshing of our community as one, but different? So when I tell kids I work with all the time, there is only one you. That's what's incredible about it. There is no one else. When we do positive affirmations on a daily basis, and we're talking about the uniqueness of each person, now it's like we're trying to revert back to, there are 2 buckets, pick a bucket, and you're either in this bucket or when in fact we are individuals in our community, individuals in our nation, individuals in the world. And so if we can appreciate that, it's how we're able to have art. It's how we're
Absolutely.
Without it, we're white walls and shingle roofs.
Yes.
That is not who we are.
I don't want to live in that beige world. I don't want to live in that beige world.
I do not want to live in that beige world. As I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, among other connections that we have, before I get into that, like, do you actually remember how we connected? How did Carla and Nadine become a thing where I could pick up my phone and call you or text you or whatever?
Okay, so I'm thinking about this now, and I'm a threat to, if I've known somebody for a long time, I'll start putting them way back in my history. Like, remember we were in 3rd grade? And, you know what I mean? So there's a danger of that. But I actually think I met you first through Studio 620.
That may be it.
I think,
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think we met through Studio 620.
Okay.
I actually think you might have volunteered at the concession at one point. There was some place that we were.
For sure. When you were in Voodoo Macbeth, I was around a lot.
We definitely
Well, we knew each other
but I knew
before that.
I knew you before then. But Voodoo Macbeth, that was a lot of fun.
Yes, it was.
But I did not know at the time what a Renaissance woman you were, because I knew you were an artist. I knew you had connections in these different spaces. But then it's like, what do you not do? What do you not do? And I still haven't figured that out. But yeah. But yeah, I think Studio 620 was the first place we.
So you're an incredible actor. And I think so.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Yes.
A lot of people know that part of me.
You played that. So, like, is that something you enjoyed? Was that something Bob threw you into? Did you already have that before?
You know what? When I went to University of South Florida, me and my college roommate ended up taking a class that we thought was an exercise class. It was called V-Body IMPROV, which we thought was like body improvement level 5, and we were athletes, so we were like, let's check this out. And we got to the class, and it was run by a woman who was known for pantomime, and she had worked with this team called Shields and Yarnell that most people won't remember, but anyway. And the very first day of class, she said, half of you won't come back, because she thought this was a physical ed class. And as much as I beg them to change it, they won't. So she goes, I'm going to take you through the most humiliating series of exercises just to go ahead and wean out who's not sticking around. And I kind of took it as a challenge, right? Like, I'm not going to, I thought I'd come 3 or 4 times and not let her win. I love the class. I love the class. And then it was sort of like at this crossroads. I was one of 2 class members invited to be part of this summer tour, but it happened at the same time I was invited to be part of what would eventually become the International Gay and Lesbian Youth Organization. So it kind of felt like I hit this crossroads and I chose the activist path. So it was wonderful to me. Years later, Andrea, my wife, ran into Bob at some cafe, and he mentioned that he was doing Voodoo Macbeth, and Andrea asked if he'd cast all the parts, and he was like, "Well, it's a black theater troupe.
It's not for you,
and it's not for you." She said, "No, not for me, for Nadine." And so that's how that happened. And in fact, I started off with a small part, This Way My Liege or something like that, and then he gave me another part because a lot of people played more than one. And then I said, hey, these 2 characters end up talking to each other at one part of the play. And he said, I got a different role for you. And then I became the famous Ross, and I loved it.
It's interesting because Bob is the one that says yes to everyone. And I'm going to finish that by saying he is the one that's difficult to say no to.
It's true. It's true.
So I am glad that he hasn't called on me yet for that. He's called on me for many things. That's just not one of them.
I think in another life, like if I really enjoy it. I enjoy everything about it. I think I told him some years earlier, I said, I will be a potted plant. I will be key grip. I just want to be in that creative environment. And so it was, I'm glad that I did well enough in the first that I got invited to be Queen Titania in Queen of the Fairies, which is a little bit on the nose in the next one. So, yeah, that's my secret. That and battle rap are the 2 things people don't know that I'm really into.
Wait a minute. Oh, look, y'all. Don't make me start banging on the table and creating a beat.
Well, come on. That's my secret.
Give us your best one. Give us your best one.
You know what?
I'm Nadine, and I come to say this is how I rock in the most incredible way. I'm sitting here with Carla B. I'm gonna rock this mic like she.
What? Okay, see, I see what you did there.
See, creatives are creatives. They just do what they do. And that's what I was going to actually ask you about, is about like your creative side. We know your activist side. Tell us about your creative side, and if it's being fed enough, or if you feel like
that is a great question.
You know what I mean? Because when you're doing, what people don't understand is activism. The word is active in activism. So it's an ongoing, continuous. The thing someone said to me the other day was, man, some people are compassionate about their children. You, Carla, are compassionate about so many things, so many issues. I worry about you. You need to slow down. But they don't understand it's just part of your DNA. So you can't be present and not raise your voice, not use your connections or your ability to respond, because how I respond to something is going to be different. And how it's received when I respond is going to be different.
I remember when those Proud Boys came to that demonstration, and the peacekeepers were saying, don't engage. And I remember you very specifically were engaging and talked to this guy who I think he came from Sarasota or somewhere.
He came from what do you call Brooksville or something.
Yeah, and he sincerely believed that he was coming there to help defend, that there was going to be rampaging through businesses, and he had just swallowed that whole line, hook, line, and sinker. And what I remember about it was a lot of people were saying, don't engage, and you were like, this is me, and I get to show up how I get to show up. And they left. They said, we were misinformed.
Yeah, I said, to help me understand, why did you come? He said, "Oh, because we were told." I said, "I could tell you, we've been out here without incident." I'm not sure why you came here, but I explained who I was, how I participated, how we have working relationships with the police in our city, how we're transforming, how we're looking at things. And he was like, "What? I left my family to come here to do this?" And that was a wrap.
Yeah.
But if we do, this is how I say things. I say, if you and I could stand outside, look at the sky, and agree on the color of the sky, we have a starting point. And I know we have more in common than not in common. So from that point, and then there's a point at which, if we can't agree on that, then it's okay to say maybe another time. But I still treat you with respect. If you disrespect me, I'll step aside. It's okay. It's another time. But most people, if they want to be heard, if given the opportunity to understand that their viewpoint comes from their frame of reference, from their upbringing, it's ingrained in so many ways. And now that maybe this is the first time they're having a human experience with a Black woman who is saying, "I'm not judging you because you supposedly hate me and all Black people. I'm just curious about why you hate all Black people."
Be curious. Be curious. I know it's Ted Lasso has made that a phrase that people are using.
Oh, really?
But be curious is such an important part of this. And listen, I'm not going to be kumbaya and say that there aren't people who with ill intent, there's no way to reach them because they're so caught up in a fear prison. And I think that's really what this is about. To me, what Pride is about, it's not just for the LGBT community. It is about saying, be your authentic self. Be the full expression of who you are, and do no harm to others. And when you try to impose rigid stereotypes on other people, you lock yourself into a prison that shaves away the unique spectrum that you bring to this rainbow that we are.
Wow.
And so this is about learning to be one's authentic self in a world that tells you that there are only very narrow ways to be who you are. And we have to deconstruct so many things, so many toxic things that we've been taught about race, about faith, about sexuality, about identity. And the magic comes when you see people who break free of those strictures and learn to love themselves and therefore express who they are in its fullness. And there are people for whom that idea is terrifying. They feel like if I do not have, it's not a coincidence that so often you discover that the people who lash out the most and have the most hateful rhetoric towards the LGBTQ community are struggling within themselves about their own identity. So we're never shocked to discover that person, was arrested for hiring a male prostitute or what have you, because healthy heterosexual people do not obsess about the LGBTQ community. They just don't. They're just like, hey, live and let live.
There's two thoughts that's in my mind. One is around the first time that I attended Pride in St. Pete. I had, of course, attended Pride in New York and other places, but attending Pride in St. Pete, how I remember standing on the corner of maybe like 28th or something like that, and I just remember these Christian pastors with their megaphones. And I'm thinking of all the places these people could be, this is where they're choosing to be. And it was part of why I felt it was important for me to be there. Because I'm like, no, everybody doesn't feel the way you feel. But the question I want to ask you, maybe twofold. One is, what would you say to parents who may suspect that their children or child is in the closet? What would you say to that parent to help? Because typically it's the fear the child has that the parent would disapprove. So, and then for any other person that's listening that may be struggling with being their authentic self.
Well, I ended up on a Southwest flight from Tampa to Texas, and I sat next to a drunk cowboy. I'll just say it like that. Right? And I feel like they just gravitate towards me on this flight. But I've set a standard that if someone asks me what I do, I will not say I work for a nonprofit or I won't obscure what I do. I will always say LGBTQ, or I'll actually say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender organization. And so I was hoping he wouldn't ask me because it was a long flight and
Right.
he was already intoxicated when he got on. And but he asked and I told him. And he got quiet for a moment and he said, I was just here visiting my daughter who goes to USF. I think she's gay. And I think that she's withdrawn from us because she doesn't know how to tell us.
Mm.
And he and his wife had gotten a divorce in her junior year. And so he said, I just spent 3 days. I didn't meet one friend. She didn't talk at all about her personal life. And I don't know what to do because I love her. And I don't want to go, hey, are you gay? And maybe alienate her if she's not. And I just said, well, I'm glad that you want to connect with her. But I'll tell you what, use the fact that you spoke to me on this flight. And you can tell her, hey, on my flight home, I talked to the head of the LGBTQ organization. It was a great conversation. And I let her know that I'm a solid supporter, that I believe and I said, just use that as your opportunity. Mm-hmm. But, as a parent, I think your kids see what you do more than they hear what you say. Mm. And, go to Pride.
Right.
Show up in the ways that you would want them to know you would show up.
Right.
And that way, regardless of what their sexual orientation is, you will be raising somebody who's learned to respect themselves and other people. I think it is particularly important. I love to see more and more Black pastors speaking out on this. The Black community overall in elected office has been a solid supporter of LGBTQ inclusion. And there's a lot of things that people go, oh, the Black community is, particularly homophobic. And it doesn't bear out in the polling. Right. But there are conversations that we must have. Like over time, our failure to respond around the HIV crisis in the way we ought to have was definitely a function of patriarchy and sexism and homophobia. There's a lot of work to be done, but I see real progress being made. And we just have to keep those conversations going. But as parents, love your kids. Make sure they know that you love them, not just what you project them to be, but who they actually are going to be in the world.
Mm-hmm. I was at a synagogue on Saturday speaking, and I don't know why this came up for me while I was there, but I just happened to ask the person who's supposed to be the greeter. I said, hey, by the way, I'm just curious, what is the synagogue's position on Pride? And they told me, they said, oh, we're having a big event at the end of this month. And they said we were like the first synagogue here to do it. And I was like, yes. Because I know many Jewish friends who are gay. So I just felt how isolating it would be if they couldn't worship and be open at the same time. So this was encouraging for me to hear that. And it made me think, like, I wonder what some of our churches are doing.
That's how allies show up. Ask the question. Because sometimes allies are in spaces where it is different. They, it's sort of like, white friends will experience, at the same place that I've been, they'll say, that guy's a real jerk. I'm like, really? He's always, I've never, oh yeah. He told me this joke that he would never think to tell me or say in front of me.
Right.
And so sometimes there's intel that, that folks have who are not part of a community. And, when you go to a store and say, hey, what's your policy on this? Like a straight friend of mine who has no gay kids, but she's been a real strong ally. We were at a conference in DC and we'd all said, oh, let's go out to lunch. And she went right up to the desk. She said, what's your policy on discrimination? I'm like, I don't know. Will you get your manager? Right. And they didn't have one. She's like, nope, we're not spending our money here.
Yeah, what a concept. Economic impact seems to drive change so often. Often. I wonder how, who am I thinking about, Target is doing. I heard they have pulled all these products and then people pull their money. Like, that's what we have to do.
We have a program called Open Doors Florida, and we actually started it years ago in partnership with the Hispanic Federation at a time when people were being harassed in stores if they spoke Spanish. There was a lot of ugliness around it. But we wanted to create a directory instead of boycotting. Direct your money to the places that are standing on these principles that you care about. And so it's open to any business that says, Yes, we don't discriminate. We have these policies in place. We believe in respecting our employees and our customers in this way. So opendoorsflorida.org, you can check it out, and you can see the businesses in your community that have taken that stand. And if your favorite place isn't on there, you can recommend. You can just say, hey, link, I want to nominate this business, or you can send the link to the owner. And we're going to invest a lot in growing that, because we think that people actually do want to vote with their dollars.
Well, yeah, what a positive direction. Yeah. Let's not talk about what we're not going to do. Let's talk about what we're going to do and create impact with that. And we know you and I could stay here all day.
We could.
We could.
We'll have to do a part two.
My mind goes like crazy all the time. But I am so grateful for such a busy person, which we both are, that we somehow made time this afternoon to just sit and chat for a moment. I hope that for those of you listening, there were a few bits and bites that you could take with you and share with others. Thank you.